for the revision of the standard or carbon footprint of product. The number is ISO 14067, but I like to use more the description of carbon footprint of product than the numbers that is not easy to remember. And I mentioned comparability, but it's not generic comparability. It's a comparability about the quantification of carbon footprint in relation to the products. And this is the key topic because this kind of activity is growing in terms of interest in the market, in particular because it's a bridge to connect the production and the consumption. So the producer, the company, and the consumer, they can create a pact, a collaboration, a virtual activities, but this need to have clear information, transparent information, reliable information. And for this reason, we are here today. So now I have the pleasure to have the first keynote. I have Miyako Enokibori from CDP. Please, Miyako, the floor is yours. The earphone was here.
Thank you so much for introducing me. First of all, let me apologize not having Claire here because unfortunately she is unwell today. So let me introduce myself. I'm Miyako Enokibori from disclosure team of CDP. So I'm really honored to be here to present from the perspective of the corporate disclosure. And I'm really looking forward to this session. So towards the achievement of 1.5 degrees target to reduce the GHG emissions, the GHG measurement is a key because only what we can measure is manageable or able to be reduced. So we need to implement various actions towards the 1.5 degrees, but the first step to achieve this target is the measurement. In terms of the emission reduction, it is getting more critical to scope 3, and scope 3 target should be integrated into the net zero target for the most of the industrial sectors. However, comparing to scope 1 or scope 2 reduction, scope 3 reduction is more difficult or not easy because of the difficulties or complexity in the measurement, or sometimes because of immaturity of the standardized accounting methodology. So looking at the current situation in the disclosure by companies through CDP, only 2,000 companies, which is 9% of disclosure in 2023, disclosed their scope 3 emissions category 11, the use of products. While over 40% of companies disclosed at least one scope 3 category. This shows how difficult for companies to measure the product-related emissions. Also, what I can say about emissions-related product is avoided emissions. We should, but please be careful that we should clearly distinguish the avoided emissions from the scope 1 to 3 emissions. And we still have some concerns of greenwashing by unclear measurement of the avoided emissions. However, it's true that the more low carbon product will contribute on the entire GHG reduction from the world. And this avoided emission is now getting more and more interest from the investors, regulators, and customers. So again, from the CDP disclosures, more than 4,600 companies reported that they have low carbon products or services. However, less than half of the product avoided emission is estimated. To take this avoided emission into account, we need the standardized methodology of accounting. So I believe that the product carbon footprint will contribute on this matter as well. So to ensure the concrete and true GHG reduction, the measurement should be the science-based and comparable and transparent. And those data should be available to any stakeholders in value chain through disclosure, as the product carbon footprint matters all of us, the stakeholders in the value chain. And today I'm really looking forward to listening to the rest of the discussion to create more transparent and accountable future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Miyako. Very interesting introduction, stimulating. You also introduce the comparison with the scope 3. Scope 3 is obviously a concept in connection with the organization, but it's underlining another important point. Comparability is within the product, but is even in connection with the organization. And for this reason, I really take the opportunity to remind everybody that also the standard for carbon footprint of organization, the number is ISO 14064 Part 1, is under revision. And what we are doing at the ISO level is to create a joint working group in order to keep the consistency as much as possible. So really thank you for your introduction. Now we have the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We have Noema Avni Kadosh. She is the director of PACT. This is a partnership for carbon transparency. So we don't have her in person here, we have a video, but I'm sure that we enjoy and we take profit of her presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today. My name is Nama Avni Kadosh, and I'm the director of the Partnership for Carbon Transparency, also known as PACT. You've heard from the speakers before me about the power and importance of having accurate, comparable, granular product carbon footprint. And this is indeed in the core mission of PACT. Established back in 2020 by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, we have developed with a very diverse community a methodology of how to calculate and exchange product carbon footprint. In order to make this an extremely actionable exercise, we also developed technical specifications to allow for interoperability between solution providers. I'm happy to share that already now we have more than 35 software solutions part of the PACT network. Since the launch of our version 2, early 2023, we have been very much focused on implementation. We want to see this work at scale. And I'm happy to share that 2,500 companies have been sharing product carbon footprint following PACT. And even more inspiring, they're leveraging this data to make data-driven strategic decarbonization decisions, which is why we're doing this in the first place. What are the key 2 success factors for Scope 3? Because Scope 3 is extremely challenging. 1, collaboration is key. Like anything in sustainability, but mainly in Scope 3. Collaborate with your suppliers, support them, partner with them, collaborate with your peers, collaborate with the regulators, collaborate with industry initiatives. This is the only way to go with sustainability. And avoid from silos, which is the second point. We all need to speak the same language. We need to push for harmonization and standardization on a global level. And that is why we at PACT are collaborating with industry-specific initiatives and regulators and policymakers to ensure we're all speaking the same language at scale. What's next? We're going to be launching version 3 of our methodology and technical specification at the end of Q1 2025. I encourage you to stay tuned. You can follow us on LinkedIn or look at the website. This is indeed another step for harmonization, actionable Scope 3 transparency. Thank you again for having me. I wish you a great event and a very insightful discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I invited the panelists on the floor. I like to underline a couple of points while they take the seat. No, please take the seat. And again, scope 3, and maybe could be important to give some very short explanation for who is not so familiar with the carbon footprint accounting and standardization. Because scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 is a language for the organization accounting. For the carbon footprint of product, we use upstream, core, and downstream. So, but there is some connection, because scope 3 is the indirect emission of the organization, but obviously is in connection with the raw material of the product and the use of the product. So this is the reason, because we listen all the time connection, overlapping, or let's say synergies between the carbon footprint of product and organization. But now let me go to the panelists. Andrew Wilson for the International Chamber of Commerce is Deputy Secretary General. And yes, the question is, what is already done by industry in terms to increase the comparability of the carbon footprint of product? Before to give you the floor, I'd like to remind all the panelists, please, to be very brief in the answer, because we want to have a conversation at the end with all the participants. So thank you, Andrew.
Well, I could be ultra brief and just simply say the video before.
No, too brief.
Okay, I thought that was an easy way out. Look, I mean, the corporate view is to say there's a lot of stuff happening. You heard what WBCSD are doing. We know there are very positive initiatives in the chemical space, where there are particular issues around granularity and methodology. But maybe just as a starting point for discussion, one reflection we have is there's still a long way to go in terms of getting a standardized approach within sectors and across the economy. And just as maybe one reference point to throw out there that might be of interest to the audience, we've recently been involved in a consumer survey, 30,000 consumers in 15 different economies, quite a varied bunch of economies, really looking at perceptions towards sustainability in terms of actual purchasing decisions. This data isn't out there yet, so please don't quote me on this. But essentially what it shows very clearly, regardless of the geography, regardless of whether it's developed or developing the economy, consumers are completely confused when it comes to green claims, and they say simply they're unable to make product choices that align with their preferences and based on the climate performance in particular of individual companies and specific products. So clearly, and I think there's comparable evidence from the financial sector in terms of investment decisions, but clearly there's something that needs to happen to bring greater clarity, uniformity to this across the economy.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Also, I was thinking that there is a study of the European Commission showing that there are two different trends in this moment. The growing interest of the consumer, because they want to buy green products. At the same time, there are 50% of these claims that are greenwashing. For this reason, the European Commission issued the greenwashing directive that is working the green claims. So thanks so much for your intervention. And now we move from the private sector to the representative of the Ministry of Economy Affairs and Climate Action, is Dieter Hoppelt. And Dieter, so what is from the other side, what is done for comparability already in this moment? Why is important the comparability?
Yeah, many thanks, Daniele. So I'm working for the NDE Germany, which is working on behalf of the German Ministry of Economic Affairs of Climate Action. So I'm not directly part of the government, but we work for them. And so what we work for, and we work also very closely with the UNFCCC technology mechanism, promoting decarbonization across different sectors. And we had a focus on working internationally and with the German government on standards for decarbonization, especially on industries, which is industry 30% of global emissions. And here with IDDI, the Deep Decarbonization Initiative by UNIDO, We work on standards, especially product carbon footprints for steel and cement, because these are really key sectors, and it's very important that we have harmonized standards globally. And we heard this from the colleagues before on leveling the playing field, creating trust also for consumers. And when it comes to hard-to-abate industries, it's really important that we have both sides. We can control emissions like we do in Germany or in Europe with the emission trading system on the production level. But we also need to do it on the product level. As you said, we have to bring both sides together because there will be no market for low-carbon steel and cement if we don't have the pull, and governments can play a key role in terms of green public procurement, in terms of if they shift in their procurement regulations, asking for standards. And here we need a clear definition and leveling playing fields among not only European companies but also globally to have harmonized standards on that everybody understands the same what is a ton of steel, and this is then also on other fields, for example, addressed in the CPAM, where we also go in the direction of global product standards. Yeah.
CBAM is a very, very important word, often repeated in these rooms. Yes, thank you. A couple of points even in relation to your intervention. You mentioned decarbonization, and there is no way to start the decarbonization pathway without knowing where you are in terms of emission. So carbon footprint of product is really basic in order to establish a policy for decarbonized products. And even you mentioned that important to have a single standard. I remember there was a side event in Germany Pavilion where there was a car producer underlining the need to have a single standard along all the value chain. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to manage this kind of activity. Thank you, Dieter. And now Christoph Winterhalter, as our friends from ISO, so he is Vice President of ISO, responsible for the policy. And so we have heard about which are the needs in this moment in terms of comparability. But what is already done by international standardization on comparability so far?
I won't explain to you, Daniele, what you are doing as good work in your technical committee. But I think from a policy point of view, we've heard it's all about collaboration. It's kind of bringing these initiatives together, using an existing network of people that know how to measure things and how to manage a quality infrastructure. So that creates trust. So ISO is kind of offering his framework to use this kind of generic standards that Daniele is working on his team and bring it to the product level and connect these product category rules that are defined per segment, per product, to make sure we can actually compare them. We can bring them together, not reinvent the wheel, but look at the initiatives. I mean, we talk about low emission steel standards, which was an initiative launched at the German Pavilion. I mean, utilize the best ingredients of this project and make it comparable, because we had at this pavilion a great discussion about green hydrogen and measuring carbon intensity of hydrogen, which will be the foundation to create low emission steel. So it's very important that these things are actually connectable, so we can aggregate the information, and the foundation is use the platform like an ISO to incorporate by partnering up with these valuable initiatives and build a narrative to connect to your generic standard, Daniele, but go down to the product level on one side and make it possible to aggregate the product specific level that we have a product carbon footprint of a company or production facility.
Thank you, Christoph. So we have a clear need, clear request from the market and from the policymakers, but as ISO already gives some answer in terms of the system, of some general standard, the PCR specific for each product. But as you mentioned, a lot is already done, but a lot needs to be done for the future. So this is also part of the discussion that we can have later. So now I give the floor to Siddhika Senaratne. She is the CEO of the Sri Lanka Standardization Institution. And so I'd like to know, Siddhika, what do you expect from international standardization in order to support developing countries to improve the comparability and also would add the implementation of CFP, carbon footprint of products?
Thank you, Daniel. So I will just describe the Sri Lanka's situation that itself will give sort of an answer like. So Sri Lanka being a small island nation, it's very vulnerable to climate change. At the same time, our GHG emissions are very low, even less than 0.1. So, but still, we had to go green. But going green is very expensive. Calculating carbon footprint, product carbon footprint is very expensive because, as you say, even though there was video showing software, we have to buy them. They're in millions. And then if we are to go for consultancy, still it's in millions. So it's at the moment, it's sort of a burden to the economy. So because of that, companies are not going voluntarily for calculations. But at the same time, European Union is coming up with all these regulations. So our companies are compelled to calculate the carbon footprint. But it's still very low number, only about 10. So that is tea, rubber, and apparel. So, however, I can say that when it comes to tea and rubber, is within all the materials, everything is within, and being a small country, the transportation is limited, and then the whole the value chain is small. So when you compare, the difference is very, very small. It's only when it comes to the apparel, where the materials coming from other countries, this comparability issues comes up. So that's our story. I think that's all I can say. Thank you.
No, it's absolutely important because the word cooperation is a key word in the COP, no? And obviously it means that the same kind of activity need to be done even at international level in the development of standard. Maybe we can come later on this point, and in the implementation of standard. And you also mentioned that it's very costly to implement this tool. But maybe there are some cost at level of tool and some cost at level of capacity building, knowledge and competence. So this is another area where we can discuss in terms of what we can do in order to improve the system. So thank you for the first round of answer. Before to go to the second round, I'd like to ask if somebody have some question for the floor. Please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all your insights. I've learned already a lot. My name is Christine Lemaitre. I'm the CEO of the DGNB, the German Sustainable Building Council. So I'm asking now from the built environment. We have developed a certification system, the DGNB system, as a market transformation tool. And since 2009, it's mandatory to do an LCA of the whole building, the whole life cycle assessment. And for that, we need data on the product level. And from what I've heard, and I know this call for harmonization, from our perspective, what we see is that it's more something from the big companies who ask for harmonization because they're in the trading business and they want to basically sell their products everywhere in the world. Looking at the built environment, it's a very defragmented market, and we have a lot of small manufacturers. And from our perspective, I mean, we have the EPD programs, and I would say we don't need more standardization. I think we would be ready to go, but what we see is a big hesitation of the small companies to do that investment. Like you said, the question is who's paying for it, and I think in the end it's not the government, and we can do capacity building, but in the end, if it's about the product, it's the manufacturer. And if you look at small companies who work very locally, for them at the moment it's really the question, is it worth that investment or not? So maybe my question to all of you somehow is, don't we need to be more pragmatic, and don't we have to look at standardization more from the small business perspective? I guess it's maybe the case for other sectors as well. And maybe to the Chamber of Commerce perspective, what do you do for these smaller stakeholders? Because the big ones, I know they do all these initiatives and they put a lot of resources and a lot of money, and they always want more. To be very provocative, maybe it's part of the lobbying strategy, so until we not have harmonized everything, we don't need to get going. But is that something you work on?
Christine, before to give Andrew the floor, let me say that the sentence, the question who's paying for it is very common in this moment in the delegation room. So really important point. But Andrew, please go ahead.
So I'd say a couple of things, and you make some very good points. I think it's good to provoke debate on the interests of multinationals versus SMEs, particularly the SMEs in their value chains. What I say is a number of things. When we talk to SMEs, this is on the potential value of standardization from a small business perspective. When we talk to SMEs, the typical point of feedback we receive is one around complexity. So where do I start? So if you Google anything related to product standards, carbon reporting or whatever, you get a multitude of different options, and most SMEs don't know where to go. And that is where the investment issue kicks in, because which one do you go with? You feel like there's a risk. Are you choosing the right option? Should you just wait and see? So I think it's not just a matter of standardization, it's a matter of clarity, but also consolidation. And that's where we see a big problem with multiple overlapping standards, because essentially the decision tree for an SME with limited resources is made significantly more difficult to the point where it stalls action. I think we also have to be very, very cognizant about this issue of cost. Our view is a significant amount of capacity building needs to be applied, principally by governments, also chambers of commerce, to actually support SMEs in that climate journey. We've just started to build a toolkit, which will go live probably in Q1 of next year or late Q1 of next year, to try and provide a simplified journey for small businesses if they're looking to reduce their emissions or at least measure their existing footprint as a business or of particular products. Where do they go? And what are the reliable sources of information, certification? What are the right standards? That's one option, but there's clearly a lot more we need to do to simplify that journey, but also to support SMEs on it, and wherever possible to lower the cost.
Dieter?
Yeah, I also like to make maybe 3 points to your question. I think first on practicability, I fully support you that we need to be practical, and I'm working at the moment on a project on doing the same thing in India, like bringing product carbon footprints into buildings in India, which is a daunting task. And because EPDs are just very at the initial stage there, and so we heard it, and it's a challenge, and we have to start then with the products which have the heaviest carbon footprint, like cement and steel in buildings, and so it needs a pragmatic approach. The second point would be, I think there's a great opportunity now with artificial intelligence, and there's a technology mechanism you're also supporting this, and because it's a lot about data, and I think with this artificial intelligence, things, if we make it right, can be much faster, and that can help also SMEs. And that would be, the third point is maybe an ask also to the standard organizations. I think if they play with this new, so we have to make an EPD much cheaper, much faster. So if standard organizations work also then on these IT tools, I think that can accelerate the progress. Yeah.
Christoph?
Yeah.
I think what I learned being a German, when working with all the low-cost countries that we have in the ISO family, that this is exactly the problem. But it's not the problem in the developing countries. It's the problem at home as well, because we have these small enterprises that have the same challenges. They cannot handle the complexity, they need guidance, but they are eager to participate in standardization. They just don't have the time. But that's kind of our daily business, to ensure that we have all the stakeholder groups represented in our technical committees, including the voice of the small enterprises that will share with us their concern how to deal with complexity. That needs to be taken into account. I mean, a scientific approach how to do in the first round the best possible solution is not going to fly. It sounds perfect, but it will be impossible to implement across the board. So when we go to standardization, we have to have that reality check. That's why small and medium-sized enterprises are so important to be part of the standardization journey, that we can basically do this reality check and lower the expectations, but get started. It doesn't make any sense to start with the highest possible ambition level, and then we just fail, and there will be a lot of pushback from the market. So make sure, and I think there we have a role to play as standardization bodies with our huge network of technical experts to bring in the perspective of these small and medium-sized enterprises from developing countries. And I think the chambers of commerce can play an important role to either be a representative for these small companies or pick the ones that are willing and capable to be the voice of the small and medium-sized enterprises that will help us to have a standard that is pragmatic and is implementable, because that's the most important thing. Then we can still add complexity, and then the IT tools come into play. Once they are kind of more mature, we have functionality that can support this, then we can take it from there. But the first step must be something that everybody understands across the board, and the key is participation. To have those people being a voice in the standardization committee.
Thank you, Christoph. Sidika, you like to add something, or?
No, it's just that I'm happy to learn at least the SMEs in developing country also had the same problem.
Maybe still
so
more,
then there is a force actually to do something about it.
We are all developing countries.
Okay, a question? There was a... No, wait a moment for a short reaction, because we have also another question.
Yeah,
please.
sorry, but I just wanted to tell you, I think maybe we're struggling even more than you do, and maybe we need to learn from you to be more pragmatic and more easygoing, because in
we
Germany
can step a
it has to be
collaboration,
perfect. Or from Italy.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Can you introduce yourself?
Özge from Turkey. And just a small comment on the discussion about being more pragmatic for the needs of SMEs. I think the mentoring of the big enterprises to the SMEs is also quite important, because they are just asking, requiring, and even financial mentoring could be also very useful, because we are experiencing almost the same struggles in the supply chain of the many subsectors of industry in Turkey. So the mentoring and the guidance of the bigger ones, maybe we could even say the brotherhood or sisterhood of the big ones to the small ones, also important. I mean, of course, it's quite important of the standards should meet the needs of the SMEs. I mean, this is the role of the international institutions, but I think the bigger ones should take this responsibility for the smaller ones in the supply chain.
Absolutely agree with you, with some example in Italy, practical example of company working, supporting supplier in terms of knowledge, in terms of tool, in terms of financial. So you are absolutely in the right direction. Somebody want to add, please, Andrew?
Just very briefly, I think you make a very, very important point. Thank you. I think just to say something encouraging, it's quite easy to be pessimistic after a few days at COP. But one thing we've noticed in the last few years is when we used to speak with big multinationals about Scope 3 emissions, let's say around 2019, 2020, typically they would just talk about imposing standards, new procurement preferences, certain reporting requirements, incentives, yes, but it was very much top-down. I think very clearly there's been a recognition the last few years that that approach is not viable, it's not working, and it's not simply equitable. So what we're seeing increasingly when we talk to major multinationals is them really thinking through how do you work in partnerships through your supply chains, and I think that's a message that we're certainly committed to sending out more broadly to global businesses, that this is a collective problem and we need collaboration through supply chains if we are to address the issue of Scope 3.
And a very important word I'm thinking, even in terms of COP, no? The top-down approach is not working so much, so maybe collaboration is very important. So very, very key point. Somebody want to add something or no? Other question, please?
Hello, this is Bing from China. So I have a question regarding the harmonization of the standard, because I think in the view of like no matter the enterprise or multinational companies, they really want harmonized rules for carbon footprint calculation. But as we notice, it becomes really difficult because in previous, the carbon footprint calculation is mostly voluntary, so you don't really need to do unless you are being asked by your customers. But since now the European regulation come into force, then it become mandatory. So you have to follow the rules established by European Union. We did some study on the methodology itself. So we have to say in general it follows the ISO standard, but there's some deviations in terms of like electricity calculation, cutoff rules, and also end-of-life modeling. So so in China, we perhaps will establish our own standard as well, which might be different from the EU calculation method, as well as the ISO method. So how, I mean, in your view, like ISO, such an international organization for standardization, how we can address those issues in the future? Because it seems now it goes beyond the level of the enterprise. It's to the government level. So how may you address those issues?
I can speak per hour, but maybe after the side event because it will be very long. But Christoph, you want to add something? Or?
I think it's very important that we have a dialogue with the regulators. I mean, there's high ambitions in the European Commission, but it's important that they use international standards as the base to implement regulation. Sometimes they go too far, so the international standards don't live up to the expectation of the regulator. But that means it becomes very difficult because the pragmatic level that has been established as the base layer in international standards might not be good enough from the regulator's point of view. And that's where the dialogue kicks in. So they are kind of injecting the additional requirements into the international standardization. Because what we do not want is to have a different regulation system, different standards to be used in China. Because we want to have a global trade. We want to use products from China that can actually be measured according to the same rules, and we can compare the products from China with the products made in Europe. I mean, CBAM doesn't make any sense if we don't have common rules to evaluate product carbon footprints of products. So it's very important that we have this dialogue, that there's regulation setting essential requirements, but then how to implement it, especially when it comes down to the product carbon footprint, that should be up to the private sector. And then we involve the SMEs and we do it in a pragmatic way and offer these standards to the regulator. Even though they are ambitious, that's the dialogue that needs to happen. What is possible, what is industry and the SMEs are capable to implement, but define the ambition level, but give us time to kind of evolve the international standardization system, that it's something that is internationally accepted and lives up to the expectation of the regulator. But the regulator is important because they give the pressure that actually these product carbon footprints are calculated and are made transparent, as mentioned in the video that we saw.
Yep. Ditram, first.
Yeah, maybe also fully agree, and maybe 3 points is also, I think, for the CBAM. I cannot speak for the European Union, but I think it was like a first step to get it in the market, and they also said at the moment they have the learning phase and want to evolve it, so I think it's not the final maybe, so it evolves further. And then as when it comes to harmonization, for example, Germany, I know they very much support that the international harmonization. So Germany is very actively supporting, for example, these standards on industrial decarbonization initiative, where we have 15 countries now joining. So please, China, also join us. And we have given guidance. We have worked with ISO on developing also guidance, how to have harmonized PCRs, have harmonized EPDs for those products. As Germany, also I think Germany is fully supporting this this process. So I think it's very important that we have harmonized standards. It doesn't make sense that every country, every region, so last point. So we had just also an event here at the COP with the Global Cement and Concrete Association, and as one of the outputs of our work with the association in IDDI also we have established, I think, which is a very good example, Now, harmonized standards, which the Global Cement and Concrete Association, I think China is also part of it, or some companies from China, has issued a standard where we have a labeling for concrete from A to F. And that is based on harmonized standards also for the product carbon footprint. Yeah.
Andrew?
Just picking up on the point that it's not the final CBAM regulation, it's still in the market. Companies are being asked to report. We now hear countries are considering regulatory changes or bespoke standards. So just the effect of having it out there and requiring companies to report has a very significant effect. And our message to the Commission has been consistent now for several months on this issue and several others where there are deviations from international standards around reporting and calculation methodologies. If you're going to have a climate measure or a trade measure with an extraterritorial effect, you have to base it on international standards. Those standards may be imperfect. You may want to put pressure on standard setting bodies to enhance them, as you very rightly said, but you cannot introduce something that is misaligned and expect the world to align with it. And the big concern that we have currently is we have the UK looking at its own CBAM, we have New Zealand looking at something, we have an indication Australia may, we have reasonable expectation the US, despite not having a domestic carbon price, may also wish to impose a CBAM. What if they all move with different calculation methodologies? How does a company respond to that, and what's the impact on SMEs? There is a severe risk of dislocating trade unless we have alignment behind the international standards. I really couldn't agree more with what you said.
Very, very important word for the conclusion. Sidika, do you want to add something here? Or?
No, off the guard.
Is already...
I just want, until we sort it out, can't the European Union go slow?
But it's really an important point, to underline the importance of ISO standard is closing our side event with the CBAM, because with the area where we really expect to have as much harmonization as possible. So the time is gone, so we don't have time for further questions, but I'm sure the panelists will be available for a conversation after the conclusion. Let me only summarize some key points of what I want to take from this conversation. So there is a clear need for comparability from the private sector as well as from the public sector. So comparability remains a key topic. ISO already has done a lot of work in this direction, so we need to start from where we already are in this moment, but also we are fully aware that some more work needs to be done. So this is an important point. And SMEs and the developing country, I'd like to put on the same part of the balance. It means that there are key players, could be north part of the world, the big company, they have resources, capability, competence, everything, and they are the weaker part of the world. It could be SMEs, could be developing country. So we need to start to have a cooperation in both directions, geographically and even the same country from in terms of value chain, what you mentioned before. And then dialogue is also needed with the policymakers, because the policymakers need to be fully aware about the ISO standard, because the example of CBAM is quite clear, and there is a high risk that each country, each region develop their own standard, and they become not only a mess for SMEs, will be not effective for the carbon reduction, because we are here to discuss about decarbonization and carbon reduction. And finally, the revision of ISO 14067, sorry I said the numbers, I forgot, the carbon footprint of product standard is ongoing. And how it works, each country are part of the process. So you can be involved in your country with your national standardization body, you can be an active person, an active expert, collecting information, sharing experience at the national level, and this experience will be collected at the ISO level to produce a new version of the standard. We know which are the weak point, critical point, but we have the opportunity to change the text. So we start this conversation on comparability last year in Dubai. Now we have done the first step forward, so see you in Brazil. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists.